I'm Alina, 28 female. I live alone in a quiet two-bedroom apartment in a city that's big enough to feel anonymous but small enough to feel like home. As a financial analyst, my life revolves around numbers, patterns, and predictable outcomes, a comforting order that I've built for myself brick by meticulous brick. I always believed that if I controlled the variables in my own life, I could protect myself from chaos. But the most chaotic forces, I would soon learn, don't come from market fluctuations or bad investments. They come from the people who are supposed to be your safest harbor, the ones who know you best and use that knowledge not to protect you, but to exploit you. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In the curated photo album of my childhood, our family is the picture of suburban contentment. There's my father, Mark, always with a gentle, slightly tired smile, a man who spent 40 years as a warehouse manager, providing a life of quiet stability. There's my mother, Sharon, a retired administrative assistant whose energy could fill any room, a woman who organized every holiday, birthday, and family dinner with military precision. And then there are the two of us. Me, the serious older sister, and Liam, my younger brother, the charismatic heart of our family. He was the sun we all orbited, and from a very young age, I understood that my role was to be the stable, predictable planet that never spun out of its designated path. Liam could charm his way out of any trouble. A dazzling smile and a self-deprecating joke were his get-out-of-jail-free cards, and they worked every time. When he failed a class in high school, it was because the teacher didn't get his creative spirit. When he dropped out of college after a single semester, it was because the rigid structure stifled his potential. When he bounced between low-wage jobs, never staying anywhere for more than a few months, it was because he was finding himself. My parents were his biggest cheerleaders, funding his whims and defending his choices with a fierce, almost blind devotion. He was their golden child, destined for greatness, even if the evidence of that greatness was perpetually just around the corner. My path was the opposite. I was the responsible one, the planner, the achiever. I got the scholarships, earned the degree, and landed a respectable job in finance right out of university. I bought my own car, secured my own apartment, and built a financial portfolio that was disciplined and sensible. To my parents, this didn't translate as success. It translated as boring. "Elena, you need to live a little," my mother would say during our weekly Sunday dinners, her voice laced with a familiar blend of concern and disapproval. "All you do is work and save. You're going to wake up one day and realize you've missed out on all the fun." The fun, of course, was whatever Liam was doing. His latest venture was becoming a travel influencer, a career path that seemed to consist mostly of taking aesthetically pleasing photos in local parks while talking about his dream of seeing the world. My parents thought it was brilliant. They saw a visionary. I saw a 26-year-old with no steady income and a worrying dependence on their generosity. But I kept my opinions to myself. Voicing them would only lead to a lecture about how I wasn't being supportive of my brother's dreams. In my family, being supportive was synonymous with being financially compliant. This dynamic was never clearer than on the day the emergency credit card was conceived. I was 22, freshly graduated and just starting my career. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table, their faces etched with practiced seriousness. "Elena, honey," my dad began, his hands folded earnestly. "Your mother and I were thinking, you're on your own now, and we want to make sure you're always safe." My mother took over, her voice smooth and persuasive. "We want to open a credit card for you, just for emergencies. A flat tire, a medical issue, something serious. We'll co-sign so it will have a high limit and it will be great for your credit score. We'll keep it at our house, safe and sound. You won't even have to think about it unless you truly need it." I hesitated. I was already building my own credit. I had my own savings account for emergencies. I didn't need another line of credit, especially one that my parents had access to. It felt less like a safety net and more like a leash. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, but I'm really trying to be financially independent. I have a plan." My mother's face fell, her expression morphing into one of profound hurt. "Oh," she said, her voice small, "I see, you don't trust us. After everything we've done for you, you think we'd do something to hurt you." It was the classic guilt trip, a maneuver she had perfected over decades. My father just looked at me with sad, pleading eyes. It was easier to give in than to fight the emotional tidal wave I knew was coming. So I agreed. We went to the bank the following weekend. I signed the paperwork and they took the card home with them as promised. For 6 years, it was exactly as they said it would be, a non-entity. I never received a statement because there was never a balance. I never saw the card. I honestly forgot it even existed, a dormant account floating somewhere in the financial ether, a relic of my parents' overprotective nature. Or so I thought. The reality, I would later discover, was that they hadn't seen it as a safety net for me. They had seen it as a savings account for their own use, one that was conveniently and legally tied to my name, my credit, and my future. The perfect facade of our family was built on a foundation of unspoken rules and quiet manipulations, and the first crack was about to appear, not with a whisper, but with a deafening roar that would bring the whole structure crashing down. The announcement came, as most things involving Liam did, with a flourish of self-important drama. He and his girlfriend of 2 years, Sophia, had gathered the family for a special dinner. Sophia was a sweet girl, a barista who seemed as mesmerized by Liam's charm as my parents were. She beamed as Liam cleared his throat, tapped his fork against his wine glass, and declared that they were getting married. A chorus of delight erupted from my parents. My mother, Sharon, was already weeping tears of joy, while my father, Mark, was on his feet, clapping Liam on the back with a proud grin. I was happy for them, genuinely. Sophia was a grounding influence on Liam, and for the first time, he seemed to be thinking about a future beyond his next Instagram post. I offered my sincere congratulations, giving them both a warm hug. Then came the second announcement. "And we're not getting married here," Liam said, his chest puffed out. "We're having a destination wedding, in Bali." The room fell silent for a moment. I did some quick, involuntary math in my head. Flights, a resort, a wedding package for what would surely be dozens of guests. The cost would be astronomical. "Wow, Liam," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "That sounds incredible. How are you planning to pay for all that?" The mood in the room instantly chilled. Liam's smile tightened. "We've been saving," he said defensively, though I knew his savings consisted of a few $100s from his last short-lived gig as a dog walker. My mother shot me a venomous look. "Elena, don't be so negative," she snapped. "This is their special day. We'll figure it out as a family. That's what families do. We support each other." The unspoken addendum hung in the air, "You will support him." In the weeks that followed, figuring it out became my parents' obsession. Their house became a command center for wedding planning. Glossy brochures of Balinese resorts littered the coffee table. Conversations were dominated by guest lists, catering options, and the merits of different floral arrangements. The budget was a mythical beast, often spoken of but never seen. Whenever I gently tried to bring up the topic of cost, I was dismissed. "It's all under control," my dad would say with a wave of his hand, though the growing anxiety in his eyes told a different story. Soon, the subtle hints began. "You know, Alina," my mother started one evening over the phone, "the deposit for the venue is due next week. It's just so much all at once." I knew what was coming. "I'm sure it is, Mom," I replied calmly. "I hope Liam has a plan for it." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. A few days later, my dad called. "Your mother and I are a little short for the mortgage this month with all these wedding expenses," he said, his voice laced with manufactured strain. "Could you possibly help us out with a small loan, just until things settle down?" I had helped them out in the past, but this felt different. This wasn't about an unexpected bill. It was about funding an extravagance they couldn't afford. "Dad, I can't," I said, my voice firm. "My own financial goals don't leave room for that right now. Liam is a grown man. He and Sophia need to have a wedding that is within their means." The refusal created a rift. My parents grew cold and distant. My weekly invitations to Sunday dinner stopped. My calls would go to voicemail. When I did manage to speak with them, their conversations were curt and peppered with passive-aggressive comments about my selfishness. "It must be nice not to have to worry about anyone but yourself," my mother remarked acidly during one brief, tense phone call. Meanwhile, Liam and Sophia's social media feeds were a whirlwind of triumphant updates. There were photos of their airline ticket confirmations, a video tour of the five-star resort they had booked, and posts about the custom-designed wedding attire being flown in from Singapore. Every update was a fresh stab of confusion and anxiety for me. Where was all this money coming from? My parents were retired or nearing it, with a modest pension and savings. They didn't have the kind of disposable income needed to fund a six-figure wedding. I started to feel a growing sense of dread, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Something was fundamentally wrong. I saw the stress etched on my father's face and the desperate, almost manic cheerfulness in my mother's demeanor. They were in over their heads, and their refusal to talk about it was terrifying. I tried to talk to Liam directly, but he was impossible to pin down. He was always too busy with wedding planning to have a serious conversation. "Relax, sis," he texted me once after I'd tried calling him 3 times. "Mom and Dad have it all handled. You worry too much." The final straw before the storm was the invitation. It arrived in a shimmering, pearl-colored envelope, embossed with gold foil. It was beautiful, opulent, and utterly tone-deaf to the financial reality I knew my family was facing. Tucked inside was a note on my mother's stationery. "Elena," it read, "we know you've been concerned about the cost, so we wanted to reassure you that everything is taken care of. We hope you'll be happy for your brother and finally learn to celebrate his happiness instead of questioning it. We've booked your ticket and your room. We expect to see you there." It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons, a command performance for the perfect family facade. They weren't just planning a wedding, they were staging a play, and I was being cast as the supportive daughter, whether I wanted the role or not. As I held the expensive cardstock in my hand, the feeling of unease solidified into a cold, hard certainty. A financial nightmare was unfolding, and I was somehow entangled in it. I just hadn't yet realized that my name was on the marquee. It was a Tuesday in early September, a day like any other, which is perhaps why the memory of it remains so jarringly clear. The air was beginning to carry the first crisp hints of autumn, and I had just returned home from a long day at the office, my mind still churning with spreadsheets and market projections. My evening routine was a small, comforting ritual: kick off my heels, sort through the mail, and pour a glass of water before starting dinner. I was shuffling through the usual assortment of junk mail, bills, and a local circular when my thumb caught on a particular envelope. It was from a major national bank, one I recognized but didn't actively use. My primary accounts were elsewhere. The envelope felt thick, important. It was addressed to me, but the return address was from their credit card services division. I frowned, a flicker of confusion cutting through my end-of-day fatigue. Maybe it was a pre-approved offer. I almost tossed it into the recycling pile, but something made me pause. A thin, transparent window on the envelope displayed a stark, red-stamped phrase: "Final notice. Immediate action required." A cold spike of adrenaline shot through me. That was impossible. I was meticulous with my finances. I had a perfect credit score, and I hadn't been late on a payment in my entire adult life. My heart began to pound a frantic, unsteady rhythm against my ribs as I tore the envelope open. My hands, I noticed with a strange detachment, were trembling. The document inside was a credit card statement. At the top was my name, my address, and an account number I vaguely recognized from a distant memory. It was the emergency card. The one my parents had insisted on 6 years ago. The one I had completely forgotten about. My eyes scanned the page, my brain struggling to process the information. The numbers seemed to swim before my eyes, nonsensical and terrifying. The balance due was $25,347.19. The credit limit was $25,000. It had been completely maxed out. Below that, in bold, angry letters, was the minimum payment, $1,876, and next to it, the due date, 3 days ago. The statement was for a billing cycle that had ended a month prior. This was the follow-up, the final warning before the account was sent to collections. A late fee of $40 and an overdue penalty interest charge had already been applied, pushing the balance over its limit. I sank onto my sofa, the letter rattling in my hand. This had to be a mistake. A system error, identity theft. It was the only logical explanation. I hadn't seen that card in 6 years. I didn't even know where it was. Then my gaze fell to the transaction history. My breath hitched in my chest. The list of charges was long and detailed, a ledger of a life I hadn't lived. The first charge, dated 3 months ago, was for $8,500, paid to Bali Sunset Resorts and Villas. The next was for $6,200 to Air Garuda International. Then a string of other charges followed. LL with one thing in common, the location. Denpasar, Bali, Indonesia. There were payments to a wedding planner, a floral designer, a catering company, and even a deposit for a yacht rental. It was a complete, itemized breakdown of my brother Liam's destination wedding. My blood ran cold. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to close my eyes and take a deep, shuddering breath. The dates. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I pulled up my work calendar, my own bank statements, my photo gallery. On the day the resort was booked, I was in a quarterly review meeting at my office. I had a digital time card and an email chain to prove it. On the day the flights were purchased, I was having brunch with my friend Jessica, and I had the credit card receipt from the cafe, time-stamped and geolocated to my home city. For every single transaction made in Bali, I had an ironclad alibi showing I was thousands of miles away, living my normal, boring, responsible life. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The secrecy around the wedding budget. My parents' sudden coldness when I refused to give them money. Their desperate, manic energy. The way they insisted everything was handled. They hadn't just handled it, they had outsourced the financial burden to me without my knowledge or consent. They had used the emergency card. The card that was supposed to protect me, that was locked away, safe and sound in their house. They had taken it, or more likely, reported it lost to have a new one with a new number issued to them, and gone on a transcontinental spending spree, all in my name. The betrayal was so profound, so audacious, it was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a desperate parent borrowing a few $100s until payday. This was calculated, premeditated fraud. They had systematically dismantled my financial security, jeopardized my credit score, and buried me in a mountain of debt to pay for a party. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the single sheet of paper in my hand feeling as heavy as a tombstone. It was the death certificate for the family I thought I had. The trust I had placed in them, the fundamental belief that my parents had my best interests at heart, evaporated in that single, devastating moment. The perfect family facade had not just cracked, it had been blown to smithereens, and the letter was the smoking gun. My hands were still trembling, not from shock anymore, but from a deep, seismic rage that was just beginning to awaken. For a few long moments, I was paralyzed by a storm of emotions, disbelief, heartbreak, and a white-hot fury that threatened to consume me. My first instinct was to scream. My second was to call my parents and unleash a torrent of accusations. But my training as a financial analyst, the part of my brain that prized logic and order above all else, took over. Emotion was a liability. I needed data. I needed proof. My first call was to the bank's fraud department. I explained the situation to the representative in a calm, steady voice that felt alien to me. I told her that my card had been used for a series of fraudulent transactions in Indonesia while I was physically in the United States. She was initially helpful, starting the standard procedure for an identity theft claim. She asked me to confirm my identity, my address, and my social security number. Then she asked the pivotal question. "Ma'am, do you know who might have had access to your card or your account information?" I hesitated. My parents are co-signers on the account, I admitted, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. But the card was supposed to be in their possession, unused. The agent's tone shifted subtly, losing some of its warmth. I see here that a replacement card was issued 3 months ago, she said, her voice now tinged with professional caution. It was reported lost by a cosigner and mailed to the primary address on file. My heart sank. What is the primary address on file? I asked, already knowing the answer. She read my parents' address back to me, the one I hadn't lived at for nearly a decade. They had planned this. They had deliberately intercepted the new card, ensuring I would remain completely in the dark. The agent then delivered the final blow. Because the request for a new card was made by an authorized cosigner on the account, these charges are not technically considered fraud from the bank's perspective. It's viewed as a dispute between the account holders. The debt is your legal responsibility as the primary cardholder. The phone call ended, and I was left with a ringing silence and a crushing sense of hopelessness. The system I trusted, the rules I lived by, were not designed to protect me from this kind of betrayal. Legally, I was on the hook for every penny. My next step had to be a confrontation. I drove to my parents' house, the overdue notice sitting on T. He passenger seat like a silent accuser. When I arrived, they were in the living room, addressing wedding invitations. They looked up, surprised to see me. My mother's face, which a moment before had been smiling, hardened into a defensive mask. "Elena, what a surprise," she said, her voice brittle. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I walked over and placed the credit card statement on the table in front of them. "Explain this," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. My father, Mark, paled, his eyes darting from the paper to my face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. My mother, Sharon, however, went on the offensive. She glanced at the statement and scoffed, a picture of indignant innocence. "What is that? Did you finally go on a vacation? It's about time." "It's a bill for $25,000, I said, my voice gaining strength. "For Liam's wedding, in Bali, all charged to the emergency card, the one in my name." For a moment, she held my gaze, her eyes cold and defiant. Then she tried to gaslight me. "You must have lost the card," she said dismissively. "Someone must have stolen your identity. You should be more careful, Elena." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. "My identity wasn't stolen," I shot back, my voice rising. "The bank told me a new card was mailed here to this house 3 months ago. You requested it. You spent the money." The denial crumbled. My father slumped in his chair, covering his face with his hands in a gesture of pure shame. My mother's facade finally cracked, but not with remorse. It was replaced by a righteous fury. "Fine," she yelled, her voice shrill. "We did it. We did it for your brother." Her confession was not an apology, it was an accusation. He was going to lose the deposit for the resort. He and Sophia would have been devastated. "We had to do something," she continued, her words tumbling out in a torrent of self-pity and justification. "We were going to pay it back. We just needed a little time. You're so successful, you have so much money saved up. We didn't think you'd even notice a little debt. It's not a big deal for you." "Not a big deal?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "It's my entire life savings. It's my credit score. It's my future." My father finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with tears. "We were desperate, Elena," he mumbled. "Your mother, she just wanted Liam to have his perfect day. We were going to work it out." But there was no working it out. They had no plan. Their plan was me. I was the contingency, the walking, talking emergency fund they could tap into without permission. They saw my financial discipline not as something to be respected, but as a resource to be plundered for the sake of the golden child. The betrayal was absolute. They hadn't just used my money, they had used my trust, my love, and my identity as a tool for their own selfish desires. As I stood in their living room, surrounded by the opulent evidence of their fraud, I realized the family I had been trying to please my whole life didn't actually exist. It was a fiction, and I had just been handed the devastating final chapter. I turned and walked out without another word, the sound of my mother shouting my name behind me fading into the cold, quiet night. The drive home from my parents' house was a blur of streetlights and tears. I wasn't just crying, I was grieving. I was mourning the loss of my parents, not in a literal sense, but in the way you mourn something you realize was never real to begin with. The image I held of them, as my protectors, my guides, had been a lie. In its place was a harsh, ugly reality. They were people who would sacrifice my future for my brother's fleeting happiness without a second thought. When I got back to my apartment, the rage returned, cold and sharp. The tears stopped. The sorrow was replaced by a chilling clarity. I would not be their victim. I would not quietly absorb a $25,000 debt that was not mine. I would not let them ruin the life I had worked so hard to build. My first call the next morning was to my best friend, Jessica. We had known each other since college, and while I had pursued a career in finance, she had gone to law school. She was now a sharp, no-nonsense corporate lawyer, and the only person I knew I could trust implicitly. I met her at a small coffee shop, my hands wrapped around a mug for warmth, though the chill I felt was bone-deep. I laid out the whole sordid story, my voice flat and emotionless as I recounted the discovery, the confrontation, and the bank's refusal to help. Jessica listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, she took a slow sip of her coffee. "Okay," she said, her legal mind already at work. "From a legal standpoint, the bank is right to be difficult. Because they were co-signers, it muddies the waters of traditional fraud. They had authorized access to the account, even if they obtain the physical card through deceptive means. This is a case of familial financial abuse, and it's messy." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "You have two paths, Alina. Path A, you accept the debt. You work out a payment plan with the bank, destroy your savings, and spend the next 5 to 10 years paying for your brother's wedding. You preserve what's left of your relationship with your family, but you carry the financial and emotional burden of their betrayal forever." I felt my stomach clench. "And Path B?" "Path B is war," she said without a trace of melodrama. "You fight. You file a formal police report for identity theft and fraud. You submit that report to the bank's highest fraud division, not just the frontline customer service. You provide them with so much irrefutable evidence that they have no choice but to absolve you of the debt and pursue your parents for it. But you have to understand what this means. It will permanently destroy your family. Your parents, and possibly Liam if he was complicit, could face criminal charges. There is no coming back from this." The choice felt monumental, like standing on the edge of a cliff. But as I looked at Jessica, the answer was already forming in my mind. What family was I even trying to save? The one that saw me as a walking ATM? The one that valued a party over my security? That family was already gone. "War," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Tell me what I need to do." A slow smile spread across Jessica's face. "Good. Now we become meticulous. We need to build a case so airtight they won't know what hit them." For the next 2 weeks, I transformed. The hurt, grieving daughter was locked away, and the financial analyst took over. I became the architect of my own defense, channeling all my pain and rage into a single-minded pursuit of justice. On Jessica's advice, I started by documenting everything. I created a master file, a fortress of evidence. I compiled my work records, time-stamped location data from my phone, and my own bank and credit card statements that proved I was in my home city during the time of the Bali transactions. The hardest part was the final piece of evidence Jessica said I needed, a recorded confession. One-party consent for recording phone calls was legal in my state, a fact I was immensely grateful for. I took a deep breath and called my mother. I played the part of the distraught, confused daughter. I told her I didn't understand how this happened, that the bank was holding me responsible, that my credit was being destroyed. It worked. My mother, believing she was manipulating me toward accepting the debt, fell right into the trap. "We know it's a lot to ask, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But it was the only way to give Liam his dream wedding. We promise we'll help you pay it back little by little. Just don't make a big deal out of it. Don't ruin this for your brother. So you're admitting you used the card without my permission to pay for the wedding? I asked, my voice feigning a desperate plea for clarity. Yes, Alina, we did, she said with an exasperated sigh. For the family. Now, are you going to be a good daughter and handle this quietly, or are you going to be selfish? I saved the recording. It was the final nail in their coffin. With my dossier of evidence complete, bank statements, alibis, screenshots, and a crystal-clear confession, I was ready. But simply clearing my name wasn't enough. They had humiliated me, betrayed me, and were fully prepared to watch me drown in debt while they celebrated. They deserved to feel a fraction of the public shame and devastation they had inflicted upon me privately. The wedding was in 1 week. They were all flying to Bali, confident that I would stay home and quietly start paying off the first installment of their lavish party. They thought they had won, but I had one last move to make. My revenge wouldn't be served cold. It would be served in front of all their friends and family on the biggest day of my brother's life. The week leading up to the wedding was surreal. My phone was flooded with texts from my family, a bizarre mix of feigned normalcy and subtle pressure. There were photos from Liam and Sophia of a pristine Balinese beach, captioned, "Wish you were here." There were messages from my mother reminding me when the first credit card payment was due, framed as a helpful reminder. Just wanted to make sure you don't forget, honey. Wouldn't want your credit to get any worse. They were operating under the assumption that I had folded, that I had accepted my fate as their financial scapegoat. Their arrogance was staggering. I played my part perfectly. I responded to their messages with vague, non-committal replies. To ensure they had no suspicion, I even transferred them a few $100s, labeling it for the wedding. They saw it as my first act of compliance. I saw it as the cost of Adam. Ishin for the show I was about to produce. The wedding day arrived. I pictured them in Bali, a world away. The sun shining, the scent of tropical flowers in the air, the guests mingling with champagne in hand. They would all be dressed in their finest, celebrating a union built on a foundation of lies and theft. My brother, the golden child, was finally getting everything he ever wanted, and he hadn't had to earn a single cent of it. Meanwhile, I was in my apartment, which I had converted into a digital war room. I had everything I needed: a stable internet connection, my meticulously organized file of evidence, and the contact information for the audio-visual technician at the Balinese resort. Finding him had been surprisingly easy. A few targeted emails to the resort's event planning department, posing as a relative who wanted to add a surprise video message to the reception slideshow, had gotten me his direct line. I had paid him handsomely for his cooperation, a small price for a front-row seat to the implosion of my family. The reception was scheduled to begin at 7:00 p.m. Bali time, which was 7:00 a.m. my time. I was awake long before dawn, a strange calm settling over me. The technician, a friendly man named Kedat, confirmed via a messaging app that he was ready. The projector and screen were set up for the traditional photo slideshow that was meant to play during the speeches. He had tested the remote connection I would be using to hijack the system. Everything was in place. As the designated time approached, my heart began to pound, not with fear, but with a thrilling, righteous sense of anticipation. Kedat sent me a discreet live feed from a small camera he had set up at the back of the room. I could see it all: the beautifully decorated hall, the smiling guests, and my family at the head table. My mother was glowing, my father looked relieved, and Liam and Sophia looked like the happy couple they were pretending to be. I watched as the speeches began. The best man told a few awkward jokes. Sophia's father gave a tearful tribute to his daughter. Then my father, Mark, stood up. He spoke about family, about sacrifice, and about how proud he was of his son. He looked directly into the camera feed as if speaking to me. "We all have to make sacrifices for the ones we love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's the true measure of family." The irony was so profound it was almost comical. Finally, it was Liam's turn. He took the microphone, his face beaming with unearned pride. "Wow," he began, looking out at the crowd. Thank you all for being here. This is a dream come true, a dream made possible by the most generous and supportive parents a guy could ask for. That was my cue. Now, Kedut, I typed into the chat window. The lights in the reception hall dimmed. The large screen behind Liam, which had been displaying a static image of the happy couple, flickered and changed. The photo slideshow they were expecting did not appear. Instead, my face filled the screen. I was in my apartment, looking directly into my webcam. I wasn't smiling. My expression was calm, composed, and cold as ice. A hush fell over the room. I could see Liam freeze, his smile faltering as he turned to look at the screen behind him. I saw the color drain from my mother's face. "Hello, Liam," I began, my voice clear and steady through the resort sound system. "Hello, Mom and Dad. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to celebrate with you today, but I wanted to send a wedding gift. My gift to you all is the truth." The guests were murmuring, confused. Liam was frantically gesturing to the staff, but Kedut was nowhere to be found. "Liam mentioned that this wedding was a dream come true," I continued, my voice unwavering. "And he's right, but dreams have a price. And I thought all of you, the friends and family who are here to celebrate this union, deserve to know who really paid for it." On the screen next to my face, the first document appeared, the credit card statement. I methodically walked the entire wedding party through the charges: the $8,500 for the resort, the $6,200 for the flights, the thousands spent on flowers, food, and photographers. I highlighted the name at the top of the statement: mine. "This entire event," I stated, "was paid for with a credit card that my parents fraudulently opened in my name. They maxed it out to the tune of over $25,000 and left me with the bill, the overdue notices, and the damage to my credit." Gasps rippled through the room. I saw Sophia stare at Liam, her expression a mixture of horror and disbelief. My mother was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, a pathetic pantomime of victimhood. Then I played my trump card. "You might be thinking this is just a family dispute," I said, "that this is a misunderstanding. So, let me play you a little recording of a conversation I had with my mother last week." I played the audio file, my mother's. Voice filled the silent hall, clear as day, admitting everything. Admitting she used the card. Admitting she did it for the wedding. Admitting she expected me to be the good daughter and quietly pay for it all. The silence that followed was absolute. The guests were staring at my parents and my brother with expressions of shock and disgust. The perfect facade had not just been cracked, I had taken a sledgehammer to it in front of a live audience. "So, my gift to you, Liam," I said, my eyes boring into his image on my screen, "is the very thing you and our parents tried to take from me: responsibility. I have filed a comprehensive fraud report with the bank and a police report for identity theft. The evidence is irrefutable. The debt will be transferred to where it rightfully belongs. You wanted a dream wedding? Congratulations. You can start your new life together by figuring out how to pay for it." I ended the video call. My screen went black. I leaned back in my chair, my body trembling with the release of years of pent-up frustration and pain. I had lost a family, but in that moment, in the quiet of my apartment thousands of miles away, I had finally, blessedly, reclaimed myself. The immediate aftermath was, as I had expected, chaos. My phone lit up with a firestorm of calls and texts, none of which I answered. Jessica, however, received a hysterical, screaming voicemail from my mother that she later described as unhinged. According to a few extended family members who reached out to me not with condemnation, but with quiet support, the wedding reception had imploded. Sophia's family, utterly humiliated and disgusted, had left immediately. Many of the guests followed suit. The dream wedding had ended in a nightmare of public shame. The flight home for my parents and the newlyweds must have been excruciating. They returned not to congratulations and wedding gifts, but to the cold, hard reality of what they had done. The legal and financial dominoes I had set in motion began to fall with swift, satisfying precision. The bank's high-level fraud investigation unit, armed with my police report and the mountain of evidence I had provided, moved quickly. The confession recording was the linchpin. Within weeks, they concluded their investigation. The full $25,000 debt, along with all the associated fees and interest, was wiped from my account. My credit report was cleared of any negative impact. The liability was officially and legally transferred to the cosigners, my parents. Simultaneously, the police investigation proceeded. While Jessica had warned me that criminal charges in cases of familial fraud can be complex, the sheer brazenness of their actions, coupled with the clear evidence of deception, having the card mailed to their address, led the district attorney to press charges for felony financial fraud and identity theft. Faced with the undeniable evidence against them, my parents and Liam, who was deemed a knowing accomplice, accepted a plea bargain. They avoided jail time, but the consequences were severe. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to pay full restitution to the bank, and had a felony conviction on their permanent records. To pay the debt they now legally owed, my parents were forced to sell the house I grew up in. The place that held all my childhood memories, both real and manufactured, was put on the market to pay for a party. The proceeds barely covered the credit card debt, their legal fees, and the down payment on a small, bleak rental apartment across town. Their comfortable retirement was gone, evaporated by their own greed and arrogance. Liam and Sophia's marriage barely survived the honeymoon. The foundation of their life together was revealed to be a lie, and the stress of the public humiliation and the sudden, crushing debt was too much for them to bear. They separated within 6 months. Liam, stripped of his charm and his parents' financial safety net, was forced to get a real job, working alongside my father at the same warehouse. The aspiring influencer was now packing boxes, his dreams of a jet-setting life reduced to the harsh reality of manual labor. Throughout all of this, I maintained a strict no-contact policy. I blocked their numbers, their social media accounts, and their emails. It was a painful amputation. There were days when the grief was overwhelming, when I missed the idea of having a mother and father to call, a brother to joke with. But then I would remember the coldness in my mother's voice, the shame in my father's eyes, and the entitled smirk on my brother's face, and my resolve would harden. The family I missed was a fiction I had told myself for 28 years. The reality was toxic. Months turned into a year. The silence from their side of the city became a normal part of my life. The quiet in my apartment no longer felt like loneliness, it felt like peace. I excelled at work, receiving a promotion and a substantial raise. I invested my money wisely, rebuilding the savings they had tried to steal. I traveled, not to lavish resorts, but to quiet, beautiful places that nourished my soul. My friendship with Jessica deepened, a bond forged in loyalty and justice. One evening, about a year and a half after the Bali incident, I was looking over my financial statements. My net worth had not only recovered but had surpassed where it had been before the fraud. My credit score was pristine. I was secure, independent, and for the first time in my life, completely free from the weight of my family's expectations and manipulations. They had tried to make me the collateral for their fantasy. They saw my stability as their opportunity and my responsibility as their safety net. By standing up for myself, I had not only saved my future, but I had also discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I had lost a family, yes, but I had gained something far more valuable, a profound and unshakable respect for myself. I was the architect of my own life, and I was finally building it on a foundation of my own making.